There is a version of fear most of us know well. Your chest gets tight, your mind starts racing, and your body seems to brace for the worst before you have even had time to process what's happening. Sometimes we call that weakness. Sometimes we simply call it stress and try to push through. But what if fear under pressure is not a flaw in us at all? What if it's simply a reflex we have developed over time and one we can actually learn to retrain? Welcome, dear listeners, to Healthy Mind, Healthy Life. I am Swati, and today we are talking about something so many of us experience but don't always understand. My guest today has experienced this from two very different perspectives. First, as someone helping people through some of their most frightening moments as a cardiac nurse, and later as the person lying in the hospital bed facing her own life threatening diagnosis. Joining me is Jenna Schutt, a former cardiac RN who has since dedicated her work to understanding fear, the body's response to pressure, and how we can begin creating a different response. Jenna, welcome. And I'm really glad to have you here.
Thank you. I am blessed to be here. I'm excited for our conversation.
Thank you so much. So, Jenna, before we even get into your personal story, I want to start with this idea that fear under pressure somehow means we have failed. That if we were strong enough or calm enough, we would not react that way. From everything you have experienced, both as a nurse and as a patient, what do you think we are getting wrong about fear in those moments?
I think that fear is a normal human emotion. It is something that we experience both in crisis and also sometimes at rest. And we're not meant to live in those fearful responses. And sometimes fear gives us important information. I'm definitely not trying to teach or tell people that we should suppress our emotions or that we should feel guilty or shameful from having fear and a fearful response. But what I am saying is that we can train our responses to fear. So when fear tries to come, we don't have to walk out the rest of the day in fear. We don't have to follow every fearful thought down the rabbit hole and feel all of those things. We can start training our response to fear to be that of faith, peace, and joy so that we can walk out those next steps from a place of clarity.
And when you began noticing that in yourself, not just in the people you were uh, caring for, what was the realization like for you?
To go from the nurse to the patient. Yes. So that was a very different shift because I had been the person who took care of everyone. I had been the person who took care of the people who were going through very difficult challenges. And then to be the patient in the bed brought a whole new perspective of compassion for people and what they're going through, a whole new perspective of how it felt to feel like you don't have control, to feel like you don't know what's going to happen with the outcome, what's going to happen with the test results, with the diagnosis, with the procedures. And so one of the things that has been so interesting to me is to learn about those things, about how we can respond, about how we can train our habits and our responses to be different than what we've already trained them to do because we've trained ourselves to respond one way or the other. You're always training your body to do something. And so those responses that you already have trained can be retrained. We can retrain ourselves to think differently and to react differently.
That's such an important distinction. Like, I feel like fear is not necessarily telling us that something is wrong with us. Sometimes it's simply the body's way of trying to protect us.
Mhm.
So, yeah. So, I want to spend a little time on your story because this is where the conversation becomes very personal. Like, you had spent years watching fear move through other people's body as a cardiac nurse. You knew the medical side of it. You knew what was happening. And then suddenly you were the one facing a life-threatening diagnosis. So what happened inside you when you became the patient instead of the person caring for the patient?
Mhm. I think it definitely started as fear. It started those emotions of what if this diagnosis takes my life? What if I'm not able to fight it? What if there is not a way for me to survive? And then you start thinking about your children because both of my children were in diapers when I was diagnosed. So you start thinking along the lines of, what will my children experience as I'm experiencing this? And so I think that fear tries to really grab you and it tries to hold you in those what ifs and it tries to make you start seeing a future that hasn't even happened yet. And I think that's why it is so important to train yourself in how to respond to fear so that when it starts going and it starts trying to pick up momentum, you know where it is that you need to go. Because when I was first diagnosed, of course, the first thing that hit me was fear and concern and those realities of my life has just changed because I was a mom and a nurse and I was all of these things and now I'm the patient and now I'm the oncology patient that is in the bed that is getting the chemo, getting the treatments myself and to have that major shift and that line drawn and you've crossed over from one side to the other and now your life has just changed can be scary and there's no denying that, but I think that knowing how to go from the fear and move past that to be able to acknowledge what's going on but then anchor ourselves in the truth of how we're going to walk that out is the importance of that.
And looking back, was there anything your years of training actually prepared you for, even though you could not possibly have prepared for the experience itself?
Well, I think one thing that I noticed is that anything that we repeatedly practice becomes easier for us to return to. So, if every strange symptom that your body has sends you to the internet, to Google to see what it is that you think it is, if every unanswered thing that's going on in your body makes you assume something is wrong, or every uncertain situation sends your mind 5 steps into the absolute worst case scenario, then that is what you're practicing. You're practicing that over and over and over again. And so that first thought might be automatic, but what happens next can be trained. And so what I tended to see more that maybe helped me or maybe just knowledge was not as great was that we can decide how we're going to walk things out. We can decide how we are going to walk and live in the circumstances that we are handed because we don't always get to control the circumstance or control that diagnosis or control those difficult, hard things that we're walking through, but we can determine and decide how we are going to walk through those things.
There is something really powerful about that difference between, knowing something and actually living through it. You can understand fear completely and still experience it in a completely different way when it's your own body. So let's bring this into everyday life because most of us listening are not sitting in a cardiac ward or receiving a life changing diagnosis. We are dealing with deadlines, difficult conversations, unexpected emails, financial pressure, family situations, the ordinary things that can suddenly, make our whole body tense up. So, where do you see that same fear reflex showing up in everyday life?
I love that question because there is a really important distinction to make, that even though my issue and my disease and my circumstance may be completely different from what the listeners are going through right now, that makes no difference to fear. Fear doesn't care what the circumstance is. Fear doesn't care if it's relationship strain, if it's financial strain, if it's a job loss, if it's grief, if it's loss. Fear doesn't care what it is. Fear just will respond with the way that fear responds, which is causing your heart to race, causing your um, self to feel wrong. It causes you to feel those effects of that fight or flight response. And fear doesn't care what the reason is. Fear only knows you don't feel right about a situation. And so it's going to start down that pathway. And so my encouragement from that is that it doesn't matter what the hard thing is. It matters how you trained yourself and how you're going to train yourself in those hard things. So whether that hard is medical, financial, relationship, like you had mentioned, deadlines, all of those things, whatever the situation is, you still need to train yourself. And I think one of the best ways to think about that is like learning how to swim. The best time to learn how to swim is in the calm water. It is to start right away. Start when there isn't something huge going on. I didn't do that. I started in the middle of the hospital bed, and I wish I would have started sooner because it would have better prepared me for those difficult moments. And all that to say that if you are in a very difficult situation, you can still start training now. And if you're not, train now for when those situations come, because you will be training something no matter what you're doing. If you are responding out of fear, if you're responding out of faith, you are responding and you are practicing and you are making that habit right now with your everyday choices.
And I think that's why these everyday moments matter. We may not recognize them as fear because they are, so familiar, but a body can still respond like to all of these. And this brings me to something I'm really curious about. I've heard people, talking about building Joy Reflex. And I love that idea because we usually hear about managing fear, controlling stress, or calming ourselves down. So how one can begin retraining something as automatic as fear, and what does building a joy reflex actually look like in practice?
Yes. I want to be clear that what a reflex really is. So, if you're not medical at all, you'd have no idea what a reflex is. When you think of a reflex, it's the same as a habit. It's something that you do without thinking. So, an example of that would be brushing your teeth. When you go to brush your teeth at night or in the morning, you don't think about how you have to put the toothpaste on the toothbrush and how you have to brush your teeth because you've done it so many times that your body knows the movements. Your body knows what to do and how to do it. So you can be thinking about tomorrow's meeting. You can be thinking about your bank account. You can be thinking about the deadline that's coming up and brushing your teeth at the same time. Why? Because you've trained yourself to a point where you know how to brush your teeth without any thought whatsoever. And so when we're talking about the joy reflex, we are talking about training faith, peace, and joy to be the same as brushing your teeth. You don't have to think about how you're going to respond. You have practiced it so many times that your body just knows how to respond. And one of the things I think that we miss is that anxiety does not always look like panic. And so, what you were saying just a few minutes ago is that sometimes we're just living our ordinary days, our ordinary lives, and what we don't even realize is anxiety and a fear response is one. And so some of those things can look like over researching. So I just need more information. I need to look up more. I need to have more knowledge. When you're really just trying to eliminate this anxious feeling of uncertainty. Or maybe it's perfectionism, where if I do everything exactly right, if I do it exactly the way I think I should do it in my head, then everything will go right. And that is trying to get rid of those anxious feelings. Now, maybe it's feeling like you need to control everything, like schedules, plans, deadlines, other people, other details, because that uncertainty of not having control feels intolerable. Now, maybe it's something like avoidance. So instead of over preparing, you just avoid it all before it is even started. So you avoid making the phone call, you avoid returning the text message, you avoid preparation, you avoid everything because you don't want to experience that discomfort. And one of the things I talk about a lot too is you avoid silence, you avoid quiet. You're not able to sit in a quiet room, in a quiet atmosphere, in a quiet environment because you have not yet trained yourself to be able to be in a peaceful area without having something going on, without having some sort of distraction. And so many times we don't see these things as responding out of fear. But if we really look at the deep, deep roots of the cause of the reasons why we are doing that, a lot of times we will see that those things are a fear response. It is an anxious response. It is something that we have trained our bodies to do in response to these uncomfortable, anxious feelings. And so, how do you undo that? How do you start to train the joy reflex by yourself, in and of yourself? Well, the first thing I always say is you have to recognize exactly what it is that you are trying to train. So you're trying to train faith, peace, and joy. What areas in your life need that training? Maybe it's not a medical issue like I have dealt with, but maybe, as you mentioned, it's a deadline, a meeting, a financial issue, a family issue. So finding out what the root is to that. What is it that you are trying to address? And then finding out what it is that you're responding. How do I respond when those feelings start? So, when I start to think about these deadlines or these meetings, that financial strain or that relationship strain, what is it that I do to try to comfort myself? And try to move from this uncomfortable feeling to a feeling of comfort, because a lot of times you're going to have those responses. And what are those responses? Is it trying to gain control everything? Is it trying to respond in a way that makes me more comfortable? Do I have to go put the radio on or the TV on or something on so that I don't have to sit there and have these thoughts that I'm thinking? So the first thing I say is to recognize it. Recognize exactly what it is. And then we're going to take it from recognition and we're going to move it to defining what is actually true right now. And that would be the second step.
Now I'm a bit curious about the long term part of this because retraining something as deep as a fear response probably is not something you do once and suddenly never struggle with again. So, what happens when someone has been, practicing this for months, things have been going well, and then suddenly life hits them hard and the old fear response comes rushing back. So, how do they find their way back without seeing that as a failure?
Well, I think a lot of times we want to think of healing and habit training and all of these things as a very linear path. So just a straight up, we're just going to go straight up. But many times, what healing and training and habit forming really looks like is hills and valleys and hills and valleys. And you're still going up, but you're not always just going in an upward motion. There's going to be times when you're going down and times when you're going up. And that's true in life as it is true in training our mental and spiritual faith responses. That you will have times where you feel like you are just crushing it. You're doing great. You're doing amazing. You're every single day you're practicing these habits. And then you'll have days where you realize I didn't practice that. I let myself have that fear response. And the thing I would say to you is that you're a human being and you're not perfect. And that's expected and that's normal. And it's not how many times that you have fallen down, but it's how many times you get back up and continue to train and continue to build the habits. And what I will say from building habits is that the more you do that, the easier it is to try again the next time because you already have started. You already know where to go. You already know what to do. And so you don't have to start from zero, but maybe you start from 10 the next time, and maybe you start from 20 the time after that. And so you're building those responses and you're building up every single time you have to try again.
And where do you think people are, most likely to give up on themselves during that process? And what helps them keep going?
I think people are most likely to give up when they don't see immediate results because that's what we want, right? We want immediate results. We want those McDonald's results where we say our order at the drive-through and we pull around and we get our order immediately. We immediately get what we want. And so those are the results that we want to see. We want instant results. We want instant things. But when you're building new habits, most of the time things are not instant. Most of the time it takes time and training. And if you think of it as the in the same way as learning how to weight train. And if you go into a gym and you see all of these dumbbells, you see all of these weights, now, if you had never lifted a weight before in your life, you probably are not going to think that you can go to the 100-pound weight and lift it up. But a lot of times when we are doing mental training, spiritual training, that's exactly what we think we can do. We think we can go to the heaviest weight, lift it one time, and be done. But we have to start small. We have to start where we're at and we have to build up gradually. And if you've ever weight trained before and you know that if you have time when you take off and you don't do it, a lot of times you don't get to go back to that same weight. You have to go down a little bit more and build that strength back up again. So, what I want to tell people is that I understand wanting to get from where you are to finished immediately because that's what we all want. But you wouldn't expect that in any other physical way. You wouldn't expect that in the weight room. You wouldn't expect that if you were climbing up a set of stairs. You wouldn't expect to go from the bottom to the top with one step. You would expect to have to take it one step at a time. So give yourself the grace and give yourself the mercy to do that with your mental and your spiritual training too. Take it one step at a time and don't expect yourself to be any further than that.
I think that's reassuring for anyone who is listening and thinking, I have tried to change this before and I still react the same way sometimes.
Yes.
Maybe slipping back does not erase the work we have already done. Maybe it simply gives us another opportunity to practice a different response. And fear under pressure is not necessarily a flaw, we need to eliminate. Sometimes it's a reflex we have learned, and with awareness, practice, and patience, we can learn something different.
Yes.
So, Jenna, this has been such an honest and fascinating conversation. So, before we wrap up, where can people find you and learn more about your work?
Yes. So I have a website and it's just my name, jennaschutt.com. I have many free resources to start training your Joy Reflex right now. And I'd love for you to come and check those out and get those for yourself because they are there for you to start training. Whether you have been trying this for a long time, whether you've never heard of it before and you want to start today, they are there for you. And I'd love for you to come and check it out and say hi while you're there.
Thank you so much, Jenna, for sharing not just your professional experience, but such a personal part of your journey with us. And I really appreciate you being here. And to everyone listening, maybe take a moment today to notice what happens in your own body when pressure shows up. You don't have to change the reaction immediately, just notice it because sometimes awareness is where a new response begins. Thank you for listening to Healthy Mind, Healthy Life. I am Swati, and I'll see you in the next episode.